This is Matthew of Another World Terraria, where I teach and inspire you on the topics of rare plants and artistic nature displays. In this video, we'll continue the tour of my entire plant collection. This is part 3 of a series of videos that give you behind-the-scenes access to my entire collection of rare and miniature terrarium plants. I'd recommend that you watch this series in order, starting with part 1, in which I share some important notes about the tour and what to expect. Let's go ahead and get started. You might recognize this tank from part 1 of the tour, but there's one new plant in here. It's not really new, it's just that I moved it in here from another tank. This long, strange-looking plant that's hanging down right here, this epiphyte, this is Eladostemma species from China. I don't have a species ID, it's just a species China. You can see some new growth coming out right there, and it is in bloom, coming right at the leaf axils there, but that's pretty neat. So this is from the family Urticacea, which is the same family that Pilea is in. Here's a pretty crazy container just chock full of a beautiful Filmy Fern species from Ecuador. Here's a totally insane miniature Homolomina species. They're from the family Auracea, and this one is stunning with pink and peach colored foliage, kind of like orange and different colors like that. And there's some really beautiful liverwort down in here as well. And this plant was in my most beautiful foliage plants countdown video, so go check that out if you want to see more stunning plants. There's some treasures in here. These are all from Indonesia. There's a Schistokyla liverwort species. There's a little Divalia species fern, probably Divalia repens, or a closely related one, or maybe like a smaller form of the typical one. There's a Filmy Fern in here that came in not doing so well, but it's starting to come back. There's a little frond right here and right here. Here's a gorgeous liverwort that has really interesting foliage, and it has red coloration, and sometimes the entire plant can get red. I don't know exactly what it wants in order to do that, but that looks really nice. Here's a moss. Some people call it peacock moss. This is Hypopterygium. It's a smaller species, and then I have a larger Hypopterygium species over here that is just not doing very well at all. You can see some of it's brown. There's some more over here that turn brown. I'm not sure why, but that one never did as well for me as the smaller species right here. And let's see, there's more of that Divalia Fern. Here's a very attractive species of Marc Gravia with white margins around the edges of the foliage, and it can get different colors of red and so forth. This one's not looking that good because I did not fertilize it and water it as much as I should have, and then also it was in too bright of light, so it kind of got pale. This one, if you keep it in extremely low light, can get blue and purple foliage, which is incredible. You can see a little bit down here of the kind of purple right there by my finger. Very nice Marc Gravia. This is a Marc Gravia species Peru round, named round probably because the very immature foliage has rounded leaves like this, and then as it matures it's getting some other leaves that are more like that. And then, as I mentioned in my previous video, these are the bathyphils, which is the immature foliage. As it matures and grows the acrophils, it would be much larger leaves that would come horizontally off of a tree or whatever. I'm not 100% certain, but I think this is more of that Marc Gravia species Peru round. Pretty sure this is the same thing. This one's looking really nice because it's in very low light, so it's getting almost a blue metallic sheen to it. Got some purple and magenta in that sheen as well. Down in this shoebox here, got a little miniature Splenium Fern, and got a bunch of Biophytum species seedlings. I don't know what species this is, but there were a bunch of seedlings in a container, and I grabbed them all and threw them in here so they can all mature. That's a really neat plant. Here's an awesome Philodendron species, a miniature. This is what the leaves can look like. They get about that large. The leaves up here are smaller because I did not water it enough and I did not fertilize it enough, and then it's also been crushed in this container, and it sort of adapted by getting smaller, kind of like a bonsai in a way. But this is a Philodendron species from Panama. Here is a terrestrial miniature orchid. This is a Corybus species from the Philippines. It's undescribed, not identified yet. It's a new species. In any case, it is kind of in dormancy right now. They get one leaf, and then they bloom one flower on that leaf, and then after a period of time, the leaf starts to die back, and then after, you know, the leaves sort of die back, new ones come up, and then they bloom again. So I'm guessing in a few months I'll probably start to get some new growth. Here's some different liverworts and things. The main one in here that you see is a species of Monoclea. It comes from South America, and I've really had a difficult time growing this one. It can potentially get extremely large. It's actually one of the largest species of liverworts in the world. It just gets massive, but it's not doing very well. It seems to have started to kind of come back, but it just doesn't want to get big, and I don't know how to make it get big. As you can see right here, it's pretty small. It's like a typical liverwort size, but it can get huge. Like the entire plant can be like the size of your hand, which is pretty awesome. This container has some different liverworts in it. There's one here that has a central stripe down the middle. There's some Riccardia in there, and then there's a little tiny Marchantia species that has kind of a dark line down the center of the thallus. That's a really neat liverwort. Apologies for the shaky footage, but I can't fit the stabilizer down into this bin. This is a recently set up bin that has a whole bunch of filmy ferns and moss and liverworts and things like that. All kinds of good stuff. Filmy fern species Ecuador. There's a nice filmy fern over here. There's a little tiny micro filmy fern right in the middle of the screen there. It's hard to see. Here's a cool little Peperomia, possibly a form of a Marginella, but I'm not sure. More beautiful filmy ferns of all kinds. Lots of good stuff in here. Pretty epic bin with some huge colonies of filmy ferns. This is all one species. I believe this species is from Borneo. It's very small and most likely somewhat rheophytic, probably grows in waterfalls and streams and stuff like that. One of my favorites. And I have that in one of my drip walls too. And then over here are some Bucephalandra. I think this is the one called Helena or something like that. I'm keeping all of this stuff for my friend. He ordered it, and I'm taking care of it until he can come visit over here, and then he'll bring some of that home. This right here is an unidentified species of Physidens. It's a type of moss. This one is from somewhere in Indonesia, I believe. It's quite a very large plant. It doesn't get as big when it's grown immersed like this, though. Here's a bin just totally full of Anubias barteri var nana, as well as Anubias barteri var striped, I think it was called. This one right here that kind of has stripes, that's what they named it. So there's some really good stuff in here, and this one was actually blooming. The barteri var nana has been blooming. That's the spath and the spadix right there. So that's looking good. Oh, and I think this one right here is Anubias Minima, with the longer lanceolate foliage. And it's not looking very good. It started to rot, but it's starting to come back now. But these are all going to be used in my Paludarium rebuild. Here's another bin just chock full of Anubias barteri var nana, as well as some Java fern, and all of this as well was going to be for the Paludarium rebuild. Oh, and there's a Anubias here. I actually don't remember which one that is, but that's a nice one with lanceolate foliage that's a bit smaller. Here's another bin full of Anubias, and there's some Java fern in there, the one that is called Windelov, or whatever the name is, that has kind of the branched out leaves. Got some carnivorous plants in this little nano Exoterra terrarium here. This one right here is Drazera Slackii, another one of my favorite Drazera species. It's got very unique shaped leaves and really nice coloration there. Got another Heli-Amphora Miner. This one dried out recently because the weather's been hot, and I kind of forgot to check it and it dried out, but luckily I got it watered in time, so it's didn't lose all the leaves. Back there is a Pinguicula. Again, I think that's Aceriana. And another Drazera Slackii. That one's really got a long stem there, lots of old leaves, and it just kept growing longer and longer. And right there, got Drazera spatulata, which is a good classic little species there. Tends to bloom a lot and do a lot of seeds. Here's a little clump of Pinguicula. I think the species is Aceriana, and it's in some nice moss there too. If you like this, check out my ping jar terrarium as well. Here's a collection of some carnivorous plants. Let's take a closer look. Right here is a little Heli-Amphora Miner, which is a nice little pitcher plant. Probably, I think it's the small species in that genus, so that's a good one if you collect miniature plants. Right here is a very nice Pinguicula. This is known as species Cores. Right now it's in the non-carnivorous state, or it's kind of like a semi-dormancy where they have smaller leaves and are more kind of succulent, and then when it really starts to grow, it will get large, wide leaves that are bigger and flatter, and then it will, start catching insects and whatnot, and then it will bloom. Got a couple small plants here of Drazera Admirabilis, which is a very attractive species of sundew. Here's another nice Pinguicula. It's a larger species. This is Pinguicula, and it can get quite a bit bigger than this. I think it's not looking good because probably too much light, I would assume. I should probably change up the conditions and try and get it looking a little bit better. Right back here is one of my favorite Drazera species. This is Drazera Hamiltonii. I like it because it's just got a really unique shape to the foliage, and it also has an interesting color. It's almost kind of like an olive colored green, so that's a really cool Drazera. I bought some seeds that were labeled as Drazera species Pretty Rosette, and that's what you see here. Now actually all of the little tiny plants around the bigger plant are second generation. So I grew these from seed. The mother plant in the center there grew, and then it bloomed, and then it dropped seeds, and now those have grown second gen. So that's a very pretty species of Drazera right there. Here's a bunch of Pygmy Drazera, which are some of my favorite plants. I just think those are really cool, and you can see how tiny they are, hence the name Pygmy. These are not the smallest ones. There's some even tinier than that. I'll see if I can name some of them here. This one is Eladostemma. This one, I believe, is a form of Pulchella. This guy here is Micrantha. This one right there is Manii. This one is some kind of hybrid between, I think, Pulchella and Omissa or something like that. This is a real nice Pygmy Drazera here. This is Carbarup. Very nice coloration on that. This is a cool one. It's a little bit larger. This is a Pygmea from Mount Lofty. Here's Drazera patens. This was Drazera microscopa, but it looks like it died back unbeknownst to me. And some Riccardia and moss and stuff started taking over, which is nice, but maybe I'll have to see if there's anything living down in there. Right in the corner here, that's Drazera paleacea. Let's take a 30-second break so I can tell you about a new resource I created to help you learn what products and supplies I use for terrariums and plants. The Another World Terraria Amazon page has my favorite items organized by category such as substrates, lighting, tools, and so on, as well as by specific goals such as creating a grow bin, growing Buce Emersed, and culturing microfauna. In combination with the free video tutorials on my channel, the Amazon shopping lists will set you up for success with rare plants and terrarium projects. Check it out at amazon.com/shop/anotherworldterraria. Here's a couple containers of Lemophyllum microphyllum small round form. This is an epiphytic fern. Here's a species of moss. This is the Hypopterygium large form. In the bin earlier I showed you the small form and some of the large form. This large form's looking a little better, but still not that great, and unfortunately I've got a pretty bad mold problem in here. The heat is just killing me right now. The heat's just making mold grow everywhere, unfortunately. But yeah, I can never really get this one to grow that well. It doesn't look its best, but it's definitely a very nice moss. Here's a pretty incredible bin of Bucephalandra species, all miniature. I don't have names for any of these, but they've got some nice foliage on them. This is one of my favorite ones down here, this little tiny one with the undulated edges and the kind of midrib that's raised. Also, this is another one of my favorites. That's really nice, as well as this one. Yeah, all these are looking really good. This is pretty full. Keep this in really, really low light. Check out my Bucephalandra Immersed Like a Boss series to learn how to do this. This is kind of funny. I've got this in a plastic Ziploc bag. It's just a bunch of Java moss and some of that miniature fern that people call Bulbetus. I actually don't really believe that it's a Bulbetus, although it could be. In any case, this is what happens when you have too many plants and you just start throwing things in bags and stuff. This is kind of funny, this Philodendron. It has basically become bone-side, just like that Philodendron I showed earlier, because I didn't fertilize it a lot, didn't water it a lot, and it's been kept in this container where it is sort of contained in there, just like a bonsai would be, and it adapts to that and becomes tiny. So this thing is really small, but it can get massive. The leaves can just be huge when it matures, obviously. Here's a couple species of Marsilia. People call it the Clover Fern, something like that. And there's a bunch of different species in the genus. They really like to be wet. They can, if they're grown submersed, the leaves will go up to the top of the water and float and be like this on the surface. But if they're grown immersed like this as a marginal, they will, you know, just get these like that. And then that's the immature foliage down there. That's kind of what they look like when they're submersed. This is kind of cool. Check right down there. There's a little Areocaulon, the one that looks like a grass and has little puffy star flowers right at the edge of the cup there. That one actually popped up out of nowhere. I actually have no idea where that came from, but somehow a seed got in there, and there it is. I've got this huge bin. This is one of those really big ones. This one is full of moss, and there's some really cool things I want to say about it really quick. One is I just bought a whole bunch of Java moss, and then I just laid it in this container, and basically it adapts to immersed growth. But one of the cool things about it is that a bunch of other mosses, species, and liverwurts, and even ferns from spore and all kinds of stuff is popping up. So that's a little kind of pro tip or secret, is that you can actually just buy a bunch of aquatic moss, put it in a container, and let it grow out, and you'll get tropical liverwurts, different species of moss, and even ferns. So that's a pretty cool little thing. You can see some ferns down there, some beautiful liverwurts all through here. Neat stuff. When I got all that moss that I put in this bin over here, I had more than I knew what to do with, so I took a bunch of these plastic like deli containers and put a bunch of the moss in there too, so I've got it all growing out in these. Here's a pretty cool Pilea species from Ecuador. This one actually popped up from seed from an import with a bunch of other stuff, and it actually seemed to get some kind of disease at one point, and then I cut all the foliage back, put it in this pot, put it in this container separate, so I'm quarantining it. It's been a long time. I need to kind of examine it again with a magnifier and see if it still looks diseased and what's going on. Alright, this is going to be a bit tricky for me to film. I might have to just kind of go from the tank opening right here. Can't really get in there. Down at the left, these are all things I grew from seed in these little black containers. But the bottom left corner there is Jesniria Depressa. There is also a Streptocarpus pumilis in there, and a few other things. Yeah, some of the seeds didn't germinate, unfortunately. That beautiful plant right there with the dark leaves and the little tiny spots, that's a super cool one. I Jesniriad. It is Gloccinia Erinoides. That one has really nice spotted foliage, and then it's starting to get a bloom spike right now, and it gets kind of a tall bloom spike with a bunch of little whitish pink flowers. Super cool plant. Unfortunately, it does have dormancy, which I don't really love. Wish I could get in there closer, but back there with the huge pinkish purple flower, that is a tuberous species of Syningia. It is a variety called Foxy Blue. So that's a little plant that has dormancy. It sort of dies back, sometimes semi-dormant. It just kind of stops growing and loses some foliage and doesn't look that good. And then eventually it'll just grow a bunch of new, really beautiful leaves. It's got some pubescence on it, some nice veins and coloration, and then of course it gets that huge, stunning flower, that tubular or trumpet-shaped flower with the purple and pink. Along the back here are some miniature orchids, most of which look pretty bad. Yeah, it's just too hot in here also for some of these. So the one that's hanging the furthest to the left, there's two of them. That's Decaya Hystercena. It's one of my favorite miniature orchids of all time. It's just got incredible, really cool, tiny little foliage. I can't reach in there because I'm holding the lid up on the tank, but it's much smaller than you think. It's like the whole plant is like a 1/4 inch across, you know, widthwise, and then it's just like a few inches long. That's a super cool one. I'm hoping to use that in a terrarium build soon. This other one that is all weird looking, lost all the foliage. That's a Dendrobium. I can't remember the name, but that one prefers cooler temperatures, and it's just really doing bad. And then over to the far right is, of course, one of the favorites, that is Lepanthes calodictian. Got another 10-gallon tank with a lid that I have to hold open, and it's too crowded, I can't reach in, so we're just going to have to take a peek from up here. The big bright one with the beautiful foliage is Monolina Primulaflora. There's different forms. I think this is the one they call red. Pretty sure it's from Ecuador. It's a type of ant plant. You can see the kind of brown bulbous thing at the base of the rosette there. And then just sort of below that in the frame is a little tiny green plant. That's a fern. That's a species of Alephaglossum from Ecuador. And this is some weird unknown thing. The heat is just killing me, I swear. Like, so many of these plants look like garbage. Ever since it's been really hot, this thing just looks horrible. But, you know, it used to be shorter and had better foliage that was green, but I think the heat is making it do weird things. Over here, another just unusual NOID right there with the big green leaves that popped up from seed as well. A lot of these did. There's some more of that Alephaglossum fern down to the very far left there. This right here is a really cool miniature species in the family Melastomataceae. It's unidentified. I think it might be in the family Salpinga. This one also is not doing that well. I think it prefers cooler temperatures. I'm pretty sure it comes from a higher elevation, but you can see the really incredible leaves that have trichomes on them and are kind of like have an interesting texture, and it is trying to bloom. Hanging right back there, you'll see two mounts hanging. The one to the right has a little fern kind of hanging off it there. They are extremely slow growing, take forever to adjust, and then when they start growing, it just, you know, takes them forever to grow one darn frond. I think I've had that thing for 1.5 years or 2 years, and it's just now started to put out a new frond. It's pretty insane, but those are super cool. Some of my favorites. I just wish they were a little easier to grow. This is a miniature epiphytic fern. I believe it's Microgramma heterophylla, and it's not looking super good right now. It was filling this entire bin, but I pulled it apart into a bunch of pieces and used some in a terrarium, and that really sort of set it back. There's a bunch of stuff in this bin. The main plant that I got was this Philodendron right here. It's one of my favorite Philodendron species, although it is quite a bit larger than I would normally get. It can get even bigger than this, but I like the kind of rounded leaves, and they have striations on the surface, very fine striations, hard to see, but then there's also a bunch of Selaginella. There's a couple different ones here. There's the white one back in the corner there, and yeah, Peperomia, and some different things in here. But I quarantined this Philodendron, and you can see it's not looking too good. I don't know if that's a disease or if there's insect damage. It's kind of hard to say, but I suspected it might have something when I got it, so I just wanted to be sure. So that's why quarantining's good. And I really don't care about the rest of these plants because I already had a bunch of them. I just took pieces from other bins and threw it in here to take up some space so that Philodendron wouldn't just be in there by itself. If you're enjoying this video, join the Team Terraria notification squad now by hitting the subscribe button and then clicking the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Selaginella species white, a really unique, interesting plant. It can get sort of a minty green colored foliage, as well as sort of just a regular green, and then lime green, yellow green, and all the way up to some foliage can be white, as you can see. So, I mean, you can kind of see how graceful it is. It's got long, thin fronds. Really cool plant. Not doing too well. I think it dried out a bit, and then the heat is on it too, so this thing is just, the heat is killing it. Got a really big bin here with some larger ferns. Some of my favorite plants in here, but unfortunately some are not doing well. There's some things in here that makes me pretty sad. One is this stunning fern with the lanceolate, really long foliage, and it has kind of striations on the fronds there. Really pretty. That is a fern in the genus Oleandra. It's from South America. It is a very large fern, though. It can get quite big, and it has long rhizomes. As you can see, all those big brown hairy branches coming out, those are the rhizomes, and it just spreads. The thing that makes me super sad is that it is just not doing well. I'm pretty sure it's the heat. I think the heat is just killing this thing like crazy. All these fronds are turning brown. This all just started happening recently, since it's been extremely hot in the plant room here. So really upset, because this is one of my favorite plants. It's so beautiful. I wish you could have seen this bin like a few months ago when all this stuff was looking really good. But there's also this cool fern over here, probably in the genus Blechnum, but I can't be 100%. And some nice, yeah, it gets kind of like reddish fronds. The new fronds are kind of reddish. This is a really cool fern here. I don't know what that is. There's a cool Splenium right there, which was looking good too until I think the heat or something did something to it. It's not happy. There's some bunch of little plants down there, you know, Peperomia marginella, more of that really beautiful little tiny Splenium fern right in the middle there. Some other weird Jesniria that has pubescent leaves right in the middle of the frame at this point. There's some Gobinia, you know, it's a begonia species. Another really big bin here, as you can see, it's one of the big ones. And right back in the corner is a miniature bromeliad. This is Neoregelia Chiquita Linda. It's a very small, but it really only stays tiny like this if you have it in super bright light. So yeah, keep it in really bright light and it'll stay tiny like this. And then yeah, it gets that kind of reddish coloration. One of my favorite bromeliads, really. That's a nice one. This one right here, I think is a hybrid between Redbird and Fireball. Just got a random Tillandsia right here. All this stuff right here is Devalia Parvula, which is a super cool epiphytic fern that literally only gets like a ½ inch tall, but it, you know, it climbs like a vine and it'll just crawl up backgrounds and stuff and branches. Very cool, really good miniature plant. Definitely get that one if you can. Here's another Divalia species. This is Divalia repens. It can get quite a bit bigger than this sometimes. This one has some sori on the bottom, on the edge of the frond there, you can see, producing spore. So I want to show you something. Remember this philodendron that's in this container, and it's kind of dwarfed because it, you know, was kept in this little cup. So this over here is the same thing, but obviously this one's a lot bigger. Because it has room for the roots to grow, and it had, you know, more space to grow, so then it got bigger. This little bin here just has a couple Selaginella in it. This one right here can really vary in appearance depending on the conditions. So in brighter light it tends to get kind of reddish and have all these different colors on it, but in lower light it typically looks more like this. And it, yeah, that's just a really cool Selaginella. I like the shape of the leaves. They're kind of rounded, and I just like the way it stands up like that. It's a really cute plant. And then this one over here is one of my favorite, absolute favorite Selaginella. I think this might be Serpens, but I'm not absolutely positive. Selaginella ID is extremely difficult. They look so different depending on the conditions, and there's so many different species, you know, I mean, and they have different growth forms depending on their, you know, stage of life. Like as they mature they get totally different looking. So really Selaginella identification, you need like a scientific key and a microscope, and it's crazy. One of my friends is totally into this genus and he knows all that stuff. We're doing great on the plant tour so far, but believe it or not, we're only about 1/3 of the way through my collection. If you haven't seen parts 1 or 2, go watch those now or check out any of my other rare plant and terrarium videos.